Hi, this is Tom Needham. Welcome to Sounds, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of film, music, and culture. Today, we have a special guest, Belgian writer and director Leonardo Van Dijl, whose critically acclaimed debut feature, Julie Keeps Quiet, has captivated audiences since its premiere at Cannes Critics Week. Executive produced by tennis champion Naomi Osaka, the film is a haunting, introspective look at silence, resilience, and the pressures of elite sports. Join us today as we explore the making of Julie Keeps Quiet. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you. Hello.
Yeah. So, Dale, tell me a little bit about what inspired you to make Julie Keeps Quiet.
Um, Many things. um, I guess like it's hard to get grip on it. But there was this quote that I read about Toni Morrison where she said like, if you want to read a book and you have the feeling it hasn't been written yet, then go and write it. And I felt that that was like, for me the intrinsic motivation was um, I felt that we lacked this kind of story. Um, in the let's say like in the there was these days there is a lot of pressure on the concept of disclosure, and that you as a victim have the responsibility to speak up about it. Yet when victims speak up, they're often like scrutinized, and in that way experience almost yeah second kind of victimization.
Mm,
And so for me in that way, like it was like I felt like that felt wrong because when somebody goes into the public space to make to break silence, it's often not because they want to be heard. They want to get noticed by that, yeah, let's say like the outside world. It is because they actually wanted to contribute to the justice in that outside world. They know that if they keep quiet and they don't say anything, that injustice will repeat itself and that they will not be able to live with themselves. So like they make a sacrifice. That's why they break silence, not to be seen or to be heard or to talk about themselves, but really like in an offer, like for us the audience, that's for who they really talk. And so that was a bit, I guess, what for me was the center of the story, where like how can I tell something with this in perhaps a more conceptual way, and that led me to the concept of silence, because when you think about it, like silence is a very ambiguous kind of force that we all as human beings carry in us. So we all know it. I know, like nobody walks out of life without ever having to face silence. We all have things that we struggle with, we are not ready to talk about, we keep quiet about because we feel the need to protect ourselves or somebody else. And so yeah, what does that do? What does it do with a human being when sitting in with that silence, knowing that at sometimes like we all know silence can be violent,
hmm
slowly eroding one sense of self. And yet, for example, for Julie, like she knows that speaking out can be equally harmful too. So how do you decide in that if you face that this dilemma? And so that's a bit what I tried to do, is like to bring this narrative, like about this girl who has experienced sad injustice and is being pressured to speak. How does she sit in with the dilemma and tell it, I guess, like more in a Shakespearean kind of way, where it's not about what happens, but really about to be or not to be, to speak or not to speak.
I like that. I'm afraid that maybe some of our listeners who haven't seen the film yet, I should have maybe given a little bit of an introduction to the storyline, which you hinted at. Can you just summarize this very quickly without giving it all away, the basic premise of the movie?
So Julie Keeps Quiet is about a 15-year-old girl, Julie, who plays on a high-level tennis at a very established club with a very, very established coach, and the coach gets suspended. And the club organized an inquiry where they invite all athletes to come and speak and share their experience with that coach. Because, in the so-called idea that they want to understand their experience with that coach and create a safer space for those athletes to be in. And all athletes go and speak. Some, are more pro the coach methods. Others are, I guess, like a bit like, not really against it, but have their questions. And then you have Julie, and she decides not to go and speak and keeps quiet.
Right. Um, quiet. The film is actually very, very quiet, more so than other movies. We play a lot of film soundtracks on this radio show. You do have a little bit of music that's very carefully used in the film. Tell me about how you used sound and music in this film to reinforce some of the themes that you were exploring.
Well, for me, in that way, like I never, it was never my aim to make a silent movie. For me, that silence is more a conceptual device that I could apply onto the movie, because we can also keep quiet when talking. You know what I'm saying, or something like
Yeah.
it's something or something. So, for example, in sound design, it was always the aim to really play with, like how loud can we go, or how silent can we go. I think in the movie there is a scene where there is no sound, and sometimes, like the sound is really like it's too loud.
Mm.
And to play, like I guess like with that or something was very important for me. As for the score, I worked with Caroline Shaw. She's a Brooklyn-based composer. She won several Grammys already. Pulitzer Prize, is one of the leading composers in contemporary classical music. And I asked her to make a song that is embodying that inner silence that Julie carries. Almost, like you had back in the days with the Greek tragedies, you had the presence of the choir, and like every chapter they weigh in and give, like almost like feedback on how the story is evolving. And so we worked with one team that really like, like is every time repeating itself, but it's more, like almost like a flower is like, I guess like opening up and becomes more dense, more layered, more I don't know, like intertwined or something.
Mm.
And it really, like it gives words to exactly the kind of words that Julie wishes to censor. um, so it's more, that's for example the concept of the music. And then in terms of dialogues, what is interesting is that the script was much more carefully written, and I guess like, like dialogues was really like, how to say, like the force that kept it going. But in editing, I just saw, because we shot it on film, and if you shoot on film, I could not see always everything on the monitor. And um and when we started to go into editing, I just was so awed by, I was really awed by Tessa, her performance in playing Julie. But I was even more deeply amazed by what she did within a scene, sometimes with a subtle look, or like I don't know, like just a body like how she composes her body, or she holds something that the movie became much more silent. And that wasn't because I wanted a silent movie, but I am intrigued by what is enough in that way. How can we always go to that show just enough that we as an audience know to proceed to the next scene. And that's really like the accomplishment I feel for Tessa, is that although sometimes the dialogues were very beautifully acted, it's the character didn't need them. So yeah, it's I think it's her force that that really like had an influence, I guess, like on script and the storyline in terms of making silent movies.
That's fascinating. Based on a couple of your comments, it seems like as a writer, you have a real appreciation for the classics in literature, Shakespeare and stuff like
Hmm.
that. Is that true, or?
Well, yes, I have, and at the same time, I mean, I am in. At first, I'm a director in that way. Like I'm still like I wouldn't really say that I'm a writer, although I wrote it, of course, with Ruud Beccard, the story. Um, you know, like it's still something that I have to learn. And if you are learning things, then yeah, well, then why don't you be inspired by the best? And then you go to Shakespeare or you go to Sophocles, and you are going into the storyline of Antigone to kind of like finding a structure in how you can tell this story or something. And so that's more it or something. That's there is the fascination, but there was also just like they all already did everything.
Right.
And yeah, who am I to think I can do better? I mean,
um,
so
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, no, it's really like, you know, so what you do is copy paste, you know. Antigone in that way, like she dares to go to the institutional political session saying I want to bury my brother, you know, like put him under the ground because, you know, that's what it is. That's the human rights, and I am here to defend it. And, you know, and really like, you know, she dares to say no to a system. And, you know, in that way, you know, like she is making almost like, you know, she's the first active activist of human rights, and we still up to today are fascinated by that storyline
Mm,
and still analyzing it. And it was almost like, you know, I will do the same. In a world where Julie is pressured to speak up, she decides to keep quiet, and because of her holding silence, people will actually start listening, because, you know, in that way, like, you know, we're not going to give easy answers here, and it demands the audience to think a bit for themselves. And I guess like that's what we like about good tragedies, in that way, that not everything is, you know, like just like, you know, I don't know, like already put in one algorithm that gives a simple outcome or an easy catharsis, but that it really, you know, like invites you to sit in with the silence of Julie and probably discover something about yourself.
yeah, I agree. And this film does make you think. So you really nailed it. I'm interested in why you chose the world of competitive tennis as the backdrop for this story.
So for me, it's always an answer that I have to give in two ways. Why tell it in sports? Well, in a way, like, you know, I'm more intrigued by politics. But if I would tell these stories within institutional settings, you are really, you know, like it's far from home. To tell it within the world of sports in that way, you are setting it up in to the in a community, and we bring it home. I bring it home in that way, and I can really show how politics are affecting, you know, our day-to-day life, and even more, you know, questioning how it is um, affecting an entire new generation of children who happen to be athletes, but they could also do, you know, like play musics or go to theater camp, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's not like that idea that, you know, like this story takes place anywhere at any age. But I feel that in that way, like, you know, the sports is just like it's a community that also is a bit hands-on in the way. So, you know, like it's like almost like it makes things easier. Then why to do it? Um, well, why to set it in the world of tennis is because I play tennis myself, and then I'm like I'm gonna tell it in my own community because that's a community I know best, and I also knew that that community from the beginning on would support me. And, you know, like to really like, it was quite challenging to make this movie, especially because in the beginning when you pitch Julie Keeps Quiet, everybody, you know, like is like, that's not really a story, because, you know, like there is no story to be told in keeping quiet.
Right.
Then it's handy that you have that support of that of your own community. And I could really, you know, like one thing is, you know, to focus on transgressive behavior, but I was much fascinated also in the concept of like safeguarding young athletes and safe child practices. And you know, I could count on on very nourishing dialogues I had with other coaches in that way, and we were also eager in talking about it, and liked the approach that it would not only, you know, like be a movie about like, oh look, abuse is happening, but also about what the impact is of a good coach, you know, like what the outcome of that is, all the things, you know, like that we actually want for our children, you know what I
Mm,
mean? Like I think that everybody wants a coach like Becky to the replacement of the old coach, you know, like to be in the lives of Julie. And you see what happens is that, you know, like Julie becomes a better tennis player, But not only that, by her performance becoming better, she also starts to engaging in relationships with her peers, reconnecting with her parents. So like there is much positive outcome there. And so that's why I tell it in the world of tennis, because I did not want to like scrutinize um, this community, because it's my own community. I was more like handling it and telling it with much care, always putting the positive outcome, the fact that things can be better, and by like investing attention in how can we create this world that is better, safer for
Mm.
children, saying that would be a world in which we all are somehow safe, or especially a new generation of boys and girls.
I was interested in the coaching part of the film because
Hmm.
in Hollywood, traditionally, I mean, the big blockbuster films involving sports usually deal with coaches that are all inspiring, like way over the top. They're just good people who get the best out of their players and overcome the odds to win. Um, your story is a little bit more complex, and in life, there are so many examples of coaches that really do make a positive difference in people's lives. And then there are also the stories of those complex relationships that sometimes happen where coaches cross a line and do inappropriate things. Um, so tell me a little bit about what you wanted to say about coaching um, in this film.
Well, I think perhaps in Europe that we have a rather different approach, that we focus really more on the fact that coaches are destroying lives, I guess, and we like to see the world of sport as a very um, sometimes like very dark, very toxic world.
Can you explain that a
Um,
little bit?
it's hard. It's just like the amount of attention that goes to coaches. We don't read about aspiring coaches in mainstream media, but we do read about the coaches who harm their athletes, for example.
Wow. Okay.
And I think it's almost like, how do you say, like that's probably like a cultural difference, and that's what I try to do in that way, like by equally dividing attention into Jeremy, who is an abusive coach from another generation, and then Bucky was just like, I guess, like not necessarily like a coach from a new generation, but like it is a good coach who has good intentions. And like I like that idea that the antagonist in that way in my movie would be divided in two characters, where like you show both sides of the coin in that way, like how it can destroy, but also how it can empower. And then like it's up to the audience to whatever they want to see in it. Like, do they want to focus on the negative outcome or on the positive outcome? That's really like, it's part of like it's the interesting dialogue. But what um I really was fascinated in was that idea about safeguarding, and it comes almost like safeguarding is not only like something that a coach should apply. It is a much more holistic approach that requires the whole community to engage in. And to say that like, for me it was important to challenge the idea that abuse only occurs in pure isolation, because it's not true. There is always societal complicity, and like something that will enable abusive dynamics to persist, especially in institutional settings. And that also like allows these abusive patterns to remain deeply entrenched even in the aftermath. And that's what you see in my movie, like even though they are there, and like somebody from the club is like, we will have this open communication, this open dialogue in which you can be safe. But like for Julie, that world, how it was structured a week before, was extremely unsafe. So why she would feel safe now just when people say that or something, you know what I mean? Like it we need to really like sometimes more go into depth and see how society, the um, or like the community, like has an influence in creating kind of structures. And and it are the same forces that we have as a community that always are placing, you know, like pressure on the victims to
Mm.
bear the responsibility, and you know, like to go into that disclosure. But it's funny because, you know, like by putting that responsibility on them, then we are also oppressing them in their healing. So that's a bit what I'm trying to say. It's like, you know, like it's never, you know, like one dialogue. It's always, you know, like that dialogue that you have with a lot of people. And that's really what I wanted to do with Julie. It was not solely focusing on, let's say, the victim or survivor that empowers herself in the aftermath of abuse, but also how her surrounding little by little sits in with that silence and is empowering themselves and finding the right way to sit in with Julie and listening to her silence, allowing her to have that silence in order for her to decide herself when is the right timing to break it.
You mentioned earlier that you're actually interested in politics and stuff like that. One of the things that strikes me as watching the movie is that whether you're at the tennis club or visiting one of the girls' houses, I believe, uh, there's real feelings of class that are presented in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you were trying to demonstrate in the film as it relates to class differences.
Well, let's say that you know, predators always know really well to target their victims, um, and it's almost, you know, like a victim comes, or their praise in that way, you know, like it comes with certain profiles, and one of the things in grooming them is to isolate them. So for example, one was from a different class, and you know, like it's something that is in the movie also said, that you know, like she doesn't really, she has like also like economical um beneficial circumstances, um but then, you know, like it's holds he is holding it up against her in that way, that she's not that equal as all the other people, you know what I mean? Like it's a
Hmm.
way to, it's to instrumentalize that abuse and saying like, you should be grateful to me because I'm giving you something that the others are not having. And you can set it up in that way, like, and you shouldn't trust the others because, you know, like they are a bad influence because they have an easy life, you know, like, and I understand you because I know what you want, because you are not doing it for this or that reason, you know, like it's a way to create in that way, you know, like a relationship with somebody. He uses that class system
Hmm.
to say you can only trust me because we are the same, and I will give you what you want. And then of course, you know, like when that comes with abuse, that's one reason for a victim to be silent, because she still thinks that she should be grateful to him for everything that he has given her.
Right.
But when you go more into, you know, like his pattern, it's not only about I give you, you know, like a discount, but it's also about like I made you a good tennis player.
Mm.
You know, you see that really like early on in the movie, that where, you know, like she is like, she gets a compliment and she's like, yeah, but it's because of my coach, he learned me that. And you know, like, and the person is really like deflecting that by saying, yeah, but it's you who's hitting the ball. And you see in her reaction that she is like, all right, I never thought about it like this. You know, like it's like this thing where, you know, like that's the whole point of like somebody like Jeremy. It's about like they have a kind of narcissistic, you know, way of approaching a narrative where they always will make it about them, and always in one way or the other, you know, you owe them something. And it will be, you know, like in keeping somebody silent, and at the same time when it comes to abuse, probably they're also going to blame it on you, as in like, this is not my fault, because, you know, like I am attracted to you because you are just such a great tennis player, or you have such a great personality, and that's what, you know, like maybe, you know, like drew me to go over the line. But it's not really my fault, because, you know, like I'm just a human being, and I listen to you, and I, you know, like I will listen when you say no. You say no, and I respect it. But you know what I mean? Like it's all part of yeah, I guess like how abuse occurs, sadly. um so yeah, I was like, you need to find ways in that way, like create angles, you know, like weak spots, because that's really what it is in that way, you know, like when you are being an abusive relationship, it is because somebody knows how to exploit exactly there where you are vulnerable. And the class system for me is um, is one part of it. And um, yeah, I think like what I also I I feel that what I like about the movie is that the coach really goes hard on let's say the rich kids, and
Mm.
he dehumanizes them almost.
Yeah.
And that's also how we see them in the beginning of the movie. And then I somehow I gave back, let's say, like um some innocence to the upper class, where they are not like like all destroyed gossip girl characters, but just like young people who want to hang around, and they are actually probably like the ones who are the biggest fan of Julie in that way. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I don't know, like it was also something that I it's something beautiful about youth or something. I wanted to give them back every character in my movie. I wanted to give back the right to be innocent or something, which I feel that Jeremy had taken away from them.
You used Naomi Osaka um, as the executive producer. Um, why did you make this choice, and what role did Naomi play in the film?
Well, it's not really like this that it happened. So Naomi Osaka has a production company, and when we were approaching our premiere at Cannes, um, I was like, you know what? Why don't we approach the production company until we have a movie? And in one way or the other, maybe like Naomi will hear about it. And wouldn't it be fantastic that she gives us like a little shout out? Like, but it's really like here I was like, like very naive, but also like, like why not? Like we can dream.
Yeah.
And then she saw the movie, and then she came back and she said like this movie, was so mind blowing, and especially the way how it's been told is exactly the kind of movie we need now to talk about mental health in sports that I want in. And I like I want to be an ambassador for this movie. And then actually like the conversation about her becoming an executive producer only started, and I think like we signed it the day before the premiere or 2 days, I don't really remember, but it was like all like kind of like a roller coaster. But it's all like it's all to the credits of Naomi, because yeah, again, like when it comes to athletes who keep quiet, she is not always like the most chatty athlete, and she has had moments where she did keep quiet in that way, like towards press, where she said like my personal mental health is more important, which I think is so interesting, because she's really a game changer. But then I also think it's so fantastic that she used her power in that way to give voice to a broader audience, to my movie or something, and to Judy her silence. And that's something that I'm extremely grateful for, to that extent that when I told the news to Tessa, who plays Julie, and the two other girls, that like basically like Grace and Tessa started crying immediately, because they said like like Naomi Osaka is our personal hero. Like she was the one that was learned us about agency when we were like 8 years old. You know what I mean? Like
Wow.
it's like almost like making a movie about like a girl who writes music and then Taylor Swift of Beyonce. Like
Right.
it's like like you really did a good job. So it's so beautiful, and for me that was so cool, because like I was so happy that somebody as Naomi like has now stands with Julie and is there to protect her. Because you when I had the movie, the premiere, I didn't know what the outcome would be. Maybe people like would hate it, the movie, and I that scared me in that way, that you are I feel a kind of responsibility for um victims and survivors. And like I don't like if this movie would suck in that way, like what says it again about who they are and their sense of worth in this society. So like to have Naomi there with you on the day of a premiere, that mattered for me deeply, because I knew like at least like that part already is is covered or something, and that's probably more important than having a good review.
Well, the movie didn't suck, and one bit of evidence to that is that your film played at Cannes. And this is our last question. If you could just tell us about what that experience was like and why that experience might, in some ways, be a little clue to people listening to this as to why they might want to go see this film.
Well, for me personally, Cannes was just like one long week of anxiety because it's my first movie, and you really don't know how it all works or something. And I guess like only afterwards or something, I started really enjoying to travel around the world, to have my movie shown at TIFF, for example, or at the Hamptons. We went to Melbourne to MIF. I'm thinking about like BFI, London Film Festival. Like we had really like a very good track record in terms of festivals. And that's only when I don't know, like I could really like enjoy sharing this movie with the audience. As for Cannes, it's just, you know, in that way, like it's one of the one of the best outlets to start a journey, and and it did really well. And it's hard because there are every year 150 movies going in premiere there. And for example, Letterbox picked 15 films to watch, and that was Nora. Sorry, and that was The Substance, you know, like all the big movies. And then Julie was one of those. And that's, I guess, like, yeah, it's kind of cool or something. But again, like for me to think about that, it's almost a year ago or something. Like it's like thinking about, it feels like 3 years ago. I've grew up so much
Yeah.
since then.
You're a pro
But yeah,
now. Well, you
yeah,
mentioned
now,
the
like
Hamptons
I'm a
International Film
beast.
Festival, and that's that takes place right here on Long Island, where this show is from. So,
Ah, cool.
yeah. So,
I've
congratulations.
been actually to the festival.
Yeah, I know. I was going to mention that. But did you have a good time at that one?
I was fantastic. You know, like I had never been to the Hamptons, and you know, like I felt a bit like, you know, in like it's one of my favorite movies, and it was in a bizarre way like a reference to my movie. It was Margot at the Wedding.
Mm.
You know, like, and I felt like, I don't know, like in this beautiful. It was just like, I don't know, like the houses. I mean, everything, the space. Just like walking there, you know, like it was like from our little jitney to the main street. It was like, it was so chic, so I don't know, like it's really like for us, we don't have any place like that, like in Europe or something. So beautiful.
Well, I'm glad you made it, and this film is really special, and I hope that people get a chance to see it. Can you give us any information about where online people can go to find out about you and your film?
Well, I know that we will have the premiere at Metrograph, which is next week, the 28th. And then I think also, like, you know, I will be present. And then also on the 29th and 3rd, we also will have screenings in New York. And I think that, you know, on the our distributor Film Movement probably will have all info about other screenings. Um, there somewhere online. I must say that I live a bit like, you know, from one week to the other. So I am now, while I'm saying this, I'm opening the agenda to see what's happening. But I think Film Movement is best to check. And we also have an Instagram, Julie Keeps Quiet, and I will be posting also more information there about the screenings. But so yeah, from part of next week in theaters in selected theaters in the States.
Leonardo, I want to thank you so much for coming on the program. I wish you the best with the screenings, and hopefully we can talk again in the future.
Okay, thank you so much for making time, for allowing Julie's silence to be heard. Have a great day.